everyone, and welcome to The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Whoop. Start tracking your strain, recovery, and sleep scores today. To get your hands on a free strap and an extra month's membership, make sure to check out the link in our description. On today's episode, I have Brian Friend and Chase Ingraham both here to discuss if off-season competitions should be a balanced test. Now, we're going to see where you guys fall. There's a lot of questions that go on to decide who's picking which side. But let's first just kind of talk about CrossFit. The goal of the CrossFit Games, it's to find the fittest man and woman on earth. But the goal of off-season competitions, it doesn't necessarily need to be that. So what should the goal of these off-season competitions be? And should it be the same throughout?
It's the should. That's where you throw a big big wrench into the entire system. It depends on how you look at it. And I hate to sit on a fence like, well, it depends on this, so I don't take a hard stance. And as you said, the CrossFit Games' sole goal is to crown the fittest on earth, male, female teams. When you look at semifinals, the sole goal for that is to qualify the top number of qualifying spots of athletes to the CrossFit Games. That's its job. When you look at quarterfinals, it's to get that next group from quarterfinals into semifinals. And you look at the Open, it's getting the top 10%, right? Each competition in the game season has a very direct point and purpose to it, which is nice because then you can judge the programming based off the purpose of the test. Off-season competitions, they have their own purpose in every competition that they do because they no longer have an end goal of qualification. It's a final weekend. There is no, okay, you finish here, you get to go here. That's not the purpose of these events. So it really comes down to what the director's goal is as far as each competition.
And I think, that's going to be that's a great question is what is the, and it's going to be a varied answer. And I think the frustrating part is when the athletes show up and they're expecting one thing and then they get something else, or potentially the fans or the critics. And so if we're going to put a should on it, if the intent of running your competition is not to have a balanced test, then I think it might be at the point where you want to explain what is the purpose, and I think back to just this past week, there's this competition. It's a very inclusive, adaptive competition called WOD Salona. Their intent is to increase opportunities for adaptive athletes to compete in competition. And they've built an event around that. And that's their mission, and that's what's driving them forward. And so if you go there, you understand the tests might be great and they might be balanced, but their mission statement is not to create a balanced test to find the best adaptive athletes. It's to create a competition that allows the most breadth for adaptive athletes to come and participate. And because that's understood, everyone can appreciate that. And when they show up there or they read about it or tune in to watch it, if that's an opportunity, they're doing it with that level of expectation. And I think that, if you're an elite athlete in the sport and your ultimate goal is to compete at the CrossFit Games or maybe to win the CrossFit Games, then you're training, thinking about participating in competitions that are going to create tests, which are going to offer you an opportunity to test the full capacity, width, breadth, depth, whatever of your fitness. And then if you show up to a competition, whatever it is, and that doesn't happen, then you start to ask yourself questions. And maybe those athletes are like, I don't know if I want to do that competition next time. But if they knew what they were signing up for, then they might not feel so badly about it. Or they may have made a different decision anyway, but at least they would have had the information available to make that decision.
And we'll get down that rabbit hole a little bit more. But first, before that, I think both of you have answered it, but let's just be clear. So do you think that off-season competitions across the board should have the same goal, or that each competition should have their own?
That's another should question. I'll give a personal opinion. How about that? My personal opinion is major off-season competitions that are putting out huge prize purses and inviting some of the top athletes in the world in our sport to the competition, promoting it as an off-season like competition like the CrossFit Games. I think they should all be balanced tests. A lot of the lines of what Brian was saying, these off-season competitions are opportunities for athletes that are looking forward to the next game season or try to get into the game circuit to see where their fitness is. And it's a huge part of their training going in. Athletes learn the most about their training and fitness in competition, not in their gyms, not in their programming, not with their camps. It's in live competition. That's where they learn the most about themselves. So they go, I was deficient in this area that I got tested in. Therefore, I need to focus my attention there to the next competition or into this off season. And so if these competitions are to basically be litmus tests for the athletes going into the games season, then I think they should be balanced tests of fitness.
I would echo that. I mean, one of the things that I wrote, I think I wrote about it just very briefly, and with regards to Madrid, which obviously had a lot of short or similar time domain tests, is that there's more things going on than just the tests on the competition floor in these competitions. And if you don't have a long beatdown of a 20, 30-minute test at some point in your competition, not only are you missing an opportunity for athletes to ask themselves, have I prepared well for a 25-minute grueling test mentally and physically, but also they're missing an opportunity to ask themselves the question, do I know how to recover from that? And then go do an intense 5-minute piece 2 hours later, because you have to be able to do the competition aspect, but also the recovery aspect. And it is a great check-in for athletes, these things in the off season, and you can't do them dozens of them. You only get a couple chances because you have to go back, recover, train again.
And Brian, you bring up Madrid. We've talked a lot about it because there weren't any workouts that were more than 12 minutes long, but with more than 2,000 athletes across several different divisions, that kind of makes sense for the type of event that they were putting on. But when we look that there was a prize purse on the line, and most of the time athletes have expenses such as travel, accommodations, do you think that the competitions should be upfront about whether the competition is testing primarily power output workouts or endurance or strength or like the specific intent?
That's a little bit tougher. Sometimes you let over time your identity or your DNA be known. And so now we're in the 4th iteration of Rogue. We can look back at 3 different Rogue Invitationals, the structure of those competitions, look at them in comparison with some other major off-season events, and we can see that there's a definitive pattern there, and it matches the DNA of Rogue. They are regularly forging ahead and creating new implements and opportunities. They obviously also have a strongman element of their event, with the strongman competitors being there, so it makes sense to use a little bit of strongman implementation in their testing, and so you end up with a test that's still balanced but skewed a little bit more in one direction, and athletes and fans know that. When you have opportunity or a new competition like Madrid CrossFit Championship, which may not be a new name for a competition, but now you bring in a new programmer in the HWPO programming team, there's a certain level of expectation that I think comes with that. And then you see the output of that, and it doesn't maybe necessarily match what people were expecting. And that's why there's all this conversation and questioning surrounding it. And it was basically, if you're going to be super critical of it, it was misleading. Because we saw HWPO program of pretty good test at Canada West that was well balanced and challenging, and then we saw a very different thing here. I don't think that HWPO changed very much, but the competition they were working with may have given them a different set of parameters, which more and more seems to be unfolding about that now. But no one knew that, and that's where the critics come in, and then you have to have all these conversations.
But if I'm Tia Claire Toomey, and I'm deciding which off-season competitions I'm going to, assuming that she has to do these online qualifiers or whatever it takes to get there. If she gets there and then they're only short sprint workouts, and she's now invested this energy, this off-season training that she's putting into this competition, ends up not podiuming, getting on the podium, what are our thoughts around that? Because she didn't know ahead of time that it was only going to be a specific type of test.
I think it's what Brian's talking about. There needs to be a communication if it is going to be different than what we'd say a traditional test that we're used to in testing the fittest people on earth, right? Whether it's an off-season competition or the CrossFit Games. And yeah, if I was Tia and you out-programmed me, I'd be pissed because no one's been able to do that to me for the last 6 years. In any competition, right? It's been impossible. And if you figured it out, I'd be a little upset, right? Especially if that wasn't communicated to me earlier. And, a lot of talk was with Madrid. I spoke on it as well, is that it was a very skewed test, nothing over 12 minutes. There wasn't anything exceptionally heavy. There was nothing in a 12 to 15 minute time frame, which is a classic CrossFit time frame to begin with. and there was nothing over 20 minutes. Half of what you would usually test in a full breath was missing from this competition. But what else was going on there, as Brian said, is were they limited by the schedule which they were given? Were they limited by the equipment that they were allowed to use? Were they limited by the number of people that, like, the schedule that could do this? There's all these other factors that go into play that I think is unfair to judge the HWPO programming crew. If they're like, listen, we know how to program a great test, clearly, but we were stuck in this little box. And so I think it's unfair to HWPO. It's unfair to the athletes coming in, not knowing what it's going to be, all coming down to this is information that should be communicated going in. For example, Wadapalooza. Wadapalooza for near a decade was just a celebration of fitness in life. It's a fitness festival. That's it. And then they became a sanction event, and it totally stripped the identity of the competition. It totally changed the mood of the entire weekend. You have one of the most exciting team competitions in the world of 3 men and 3 women, and they were forced to go 2 and 2. You had a fitness festival of individual athletes all over the place, and then we had to pick just one. And then when they got it back, when they stepped out of the competition season, they got their identity back. It became a fitness fun festival again. It was always a great test, but you had swimming. You had all these unique elements that were unique to Wadapalooza, which was always known. And so athletes going there know what they know they're going to get in the water. They know they're going to do something crazy in the lights and maybe something a little outside the bubble, just a little bit. That's known because they communicate that. I think some of these new competitions just don't grasp that yet, but now in the level of competition and eyeballs we have, when you're putting out a $30,000 prize, it's like you are asking for people to get more involved in from the outside as far as criticism, judgment, and overall interest in the community.
I think that, part of that some of the competitions may have a fear of doing that, saying, hey, we are having this competition. There is a big prize purse, but the feel of the competition might look a little different and how people would respond to that. But this has actually happened before. Chase will remember this. The Italian Showdown, as part of the original sanctional circuit, they had like 1,000 people compete. How did they do that? They had 3 events that took place back to back to back. When it was your turn, you went on the floor, you did a 1 quick burner, you move forward, a couple minute reset, another quick burner, move forward, a couple minute reset, another quick burner. After all of the hundreds of people had gone through it, a certain number of them moved on to day 2. But it wasn't a mystery and it wasn't a surprise. Everyone knew what that competition was going to look like ahead of time. And you still had people like Scott Panchik and Noah Olson and Lucas Esslinger and Roman Krennikov in the field that showed up to do that because it was fun, it was different, it was known, and they had a great turnout anyway. So I think if you're a competition director that's nervous about that, you can look backwards and say, if we have a plan and we want to do something and it's a little bit different, be proud of that. Own it, communicate it up front, and then see who shows up. And you might be surprised.
Dubai was going to do something completely different recently before they didn't have the event where, 2020. Dubai was actually going to turn it into a almost 10 event single modality test where there's only going to be a row event or a run event or a gymnastics test. And they were going to promote that. So before coming in, you're like, I know exactly what I'm showing up for. I'm showing up for a unique test, 10 different type of skills tests, whether it's monostructural weightlifting or gymnastics. Had they not done that, had you showed up to Dubai thinking it was the usual Dubai competition, imagine the reaction of everyone. Outrage. Absolutely. I mean, that is a trip. To go to Dubai is a hike to get there. And it's always been heralded as one of the better programmed off seasons, one of the more, not over programmed, but a very tough, full breadth test competition. You're swimming in the ocean, you're running in the sand dunes, all these kind of things. But if you showed up for that, that is so off the walls different. But if you promote it, then everyone has the knowledge of going in and you can choose to come here or not. So it all comes down to communication. What is the purpose of this competition should be communicated to everyone, because once you do that, there's nothing left to talk about. It's like, oh, all of these tests were under 10 minutes long and there were 8 of them. Yep. We told you that. That's what you're showing up for. So let's talk about the 8-minute test that they programmed. And then we have a different point of view when we judge things like that.
So Chase, is that your bottom line?
Yes. Let the people know. Let the people know what your goal is. And I get it if it's your first run and you're not talking about it, but I think just like anything, I mean, how often have we said communication has really been the major problem of a lot of things in 2022 when it comes to game seasons and off seasons alike? Just tell us what you want to do.
Brian, what's your bottom line?
I would echo Chase and then just build on it and say, part of the thing that makes this sport and this methodology great is the opportunity for creativity. So if you think you have a cool idea that's a little bit different, don't shy away from it. Maybe run it by your team. It can maybe be feathered out and improved a little bit, and then put it out there and see what happens, because that's what competitions in the past have done. And it's oftentimes ends up being a great thing.
Brian, Chase, thanks for sitting down and chatting with us, and we'll see you next time.